News that Oxfam was aware that some aid workers were sexually exploiting children in Haiti years before its staff hired prostitutes in the country. And with me is Andrew Teacher. He's the MD of the PR firm Blackstock. Andy, thanks a lot for talking to us this evening. Let's look at what Mark Goldring has said. He's the Oxfam chief executive. In response to all of this, he's come out and said the intensity and the ferocity of the attack makes you wonder, what did we do? We murdered babies in their cots, ? Do you think that's something that, given what's going on, he should be coming out and saying?
It's the sort of thing that in most companies would see you kicked out the door quicker than you can say world peace is none of your business. I think the problem here is that people are losing sight to some degree of the good that Oxfam does, and what we've seen is a lot of quite poisonous comment from the right that again is repeating these calls for the aid budget to be cut and all of this nonsense that I think does need to be stamped out right away. But let's be honest, the interview that he did in The Guardian this week, it would have been a bit more nuanced, but ultimately you shouldn't be saying stuff like that because he's the CEO of a big organisation, essentially the size of a FTSE 250 business, and whoever let him sit there and make those comments really deserves to be shot, frankly, because it's obviously going to be the kind of thing that newspapers pick up on, but frankly, in rallying against the press as he's done, he comes across a bit like a petulant child. And really, the Times newspaper should be praised for its investigative work here. It's been a story that's led the news agenda for over a week now. And rather than coming out and criticising the media attention, he should be showing contrition and he should be setting out how the organisation is going to win back public trust, because let's be honest, that the public isn't stupid. The public understands, I think, that this is a very small handful of very bad people in a very good organisation. I think people appreciate the good work that Oxfam has done for decades and the great work that British aid and British development does all around the world. But and as we've seen, with companies like Marks and Spencer's, who've obviously had crises in Turkey with kids making underwear, and we've had problems with all sorts of other brands over the years, from VW to the Daily Mirror and its phone hacking scandal. All of these things happen, and the public largely forgives and forgets over time, and hopefully that will happen with Oxfam. But it's not going to happen if the CEO can't shut his mouth for a few minutes and try to show a bit of leadership and a bit of contrition on what is obviously a very massive and very regrettable scandal. Well,
he's called it an intense and ferocious attack. I want to go back to what you said about the media picking up on it. Don't you think it's the media's duty? We're dealing with the most vulnerable people in the world here. Looking at this Save the Children report from 2008.
Absolutely, it's the media's duty, and that's why I think this to some degree is one of those stories that really highlights the brilliance of British journalism in leading and bringing to light a story that does need the sort of exposure it's getting. But I think ultimately what would be a negative outcome here is if we try and do what the media often does, and whether there is obviously a bit of blood-scented scalp hunting going on in some quarters. But what we don't want is to stop all the good stuff that's been happening. I think there's a degree that the media should hold this guy to account. But where we're seeing a lot of hypocrisy coming out, and people like the Tory former Minister Priti Patel coming out and calling for his head, these guys probably knew what was going on whilst in government. So that's what I think we need to start calling out, is some of the hypocrisy that's here, and really avoid any situation where people use this as an example to cut the aid budget and to stop a lot of the really good, positive work that needs to continue to happen.
Well, let's talk about the hypocrisy. Let's look specifically at this Save the Children report from 2008 that they knew about, OK? The charity Save the Children found that children in Haiti, southern Sudan and the Ivory Coast were being coerced into sex, forced into sexual slavery and being offered food in return for performing sex acts, with a 15-year-old girl offered the equivalent of £2 and some chocolate to perform a sex act on a couple of humanitarian men.
I mean, there aren't any words that can put that into...
But Oxfam replied. They said that as a result of that report, a senior member of Oxfam staff visited Haiti to assess the situation for himself. Measures were put in place. However, these measures proved insufficient and could have been compromised by staff who were later investigated by Oxfam and found guilty of misconduct. Shouldn't we be calling for people's heads over this kind of failing?
We should be, but I think it needs to be the right people. I mean, Goldring wasn't there at the point that these things happen. He came into Oxfam in 2013, and that's several years after these incidents that have been reported. I think there is a level of nuance here that it isn't necessarily brought to the fore, in the fact that when he did come in, according to what he has said, he did introduce a number of safeguarding measures. Were they enough? Maybe not, but I think we need to bear in mind that this hasn't happened on Goldring's watch. His response this week and the last couple of days has been disgraceful, but clearly he's not a PR bloke. He's a bloke that runs a charity, and what he probably needs is some better advisors. One of the interesting points I think I did see in the press today, it was in the Times, was the comparison of how many press officers they have versus how many safeguarding professionals.
I'm going to have to jump in there, Andrew. Andrew Teacher from Blackstock